In the era of the Old West, a time when the frontiers were wild and tales grew into legends, some of the most famous gunslingers in American history emerged. These individuals, both men and women, stood out not just for their quick draw, but also for their ability to survive in the harshest environments. With reputations built on face-to-face showdowns in the dusty streets of towns where the law was often ignored, they ranged from ruthless outlaws to vigilantes fighting for justice. Get ready to explore the stories of the 10 most feared gunslingers of the Old West, characters whose combat skills and daring feats etched their names into the history of this tumultuous period. Number 10. William Curly Bill Brocius. He was known for both his distinctive curly hair and his exploits in the West. He rose to command the Cowboys, an infamous gang of cattle rustlers in Tombstone, Arizona, after the death of Old Man Clanton. Besides leading the gang, Curly Bill played a role in local tax collection, working under the orders of Sheriff John Behan of Cochise County. Curly Bill was also notorious for his habit of excessive drinking, which often amplified his impulsive behavior. On one memorable occasion while he was drinking with other cowboys, Marshal Fred White intervened, asking Curly Bill to hand over his gun as a precaution. Tragically, the gun accidentally went off during the handover, severely wounding White. In a show of mutual respect, Fred White, even while gravely injured, maintained until his last breath that he believed in Curly Bill's innocence, stating that the shooting had been an accident. Curly Bill Brocius walked free from the charges, thanks in part to Wyatt Earp's testimony in his favor during the trial. However, that acquittal didn't put an end to the disputes. Tensions in the area only grew, leading to a tragic showdown between Wyatt Earp and Curly Bill, which ended with Curly Bill's death. This decisive confrontation was driven by Wyatt Earp's desire for revenge over the murder of his brother, Morgan Earp. These events highlight the complexity of personal relationships and the shaky nature of justice in the tense and unpredictable environment of the Old West. Number 9. Sam Bass. He started his life on the straight and narrow, but soon his fate took a different turn. After escaping from an abusive uncle's home, he took on manual labor at a sawmill in Mississippi. But his true dream was to become a cowboy. With that goal in mind, he headed to Texas, where he tried his luck in ranching, only to quickly realize it wasn't the life for him. In 1876, along with a hot-tempered acquaintance named Joel Collins, Bass drove a herd of longhorn cattle north hoping for better prices. But instead of sticking to their deal with the cattle owners, the two pocketed the $8,000 they made from the sale. That small fortune was soon blown away on gambling in Deadwood. Not long after, the duo turned to crime, starting with stagecoach robberies, though they didn't have much financial success. Unsatisfied, Bass and his gang decided to step up their game by targeting trains. They pulled off a daring heist on the Union Pacific's gold train, making off with over $60,000, a sum that had never been stolen in a single raid from the company at that time. But Bass's criminal career came to a sudden end when he was wounded by Texas Rangers while planning a bank robbery in Round Rock. Sam Bass died from his injuries 2 days later, on the very day he would have turned 27. Number 8. James B. Miller. Nicknamed Deacon Jim because of his regular church attendance and his avoidance of vices like smoking and drinking, he had a contradictory reputation. On the outside, he seemed like a devout man, but behind that facade was one of the most feared killers of the Old West. He took on hit jobs, charging anywhere from $150 to $2,000, a hefty sum for those times. Miller preferred to strike at night, wearing a long coat that helped him blend into the shadows. Underneath that coat, Miller wore a steel plate as a makeshift bulletproof vest, giving him an extra layer of protection during his ambushes. While official records count 14 confirmed victims, popular speculation suggests he might have been responsible for as many as 50 deaths. His criminal career came to an end when he was captured in Oklahoma after the murder of Gus Bobbitt. Doubting the effectiveness of the justice system, the locals decided to take the law into their own hands. They formed a lynch mob and took Miller and 3 other men to an abandoned barn, where they were to be hanged without a formal trial. Before his execution, Miller made 2 requests. He wanted his ring to be given to his wife, who had family ties to the notorious John Wesley Hardin, and he asked to wear his hat while he was hanged. With a final shout of, "Let her rip," Miller jumped off the box, facing his fate with defiance. The bodies hung there for hours until a photographer arrived to capture that grim moment. This brutal event highlighted the harsh realities of Old West justice and cemented Miller's reputation as one of the most feared gunslingers of the time. Number 7. Belle Star. Born Myra Maybelle Shirley, she had a childhood filled with academic achievements at the Carthage Female Academy in Missouri, where she also stood out as a pianist. During her youth, Maybelle formed close ties with infamous outlaws like Cole Younger and the James brothers, who were regular visitors at her family's farm. These connections introduced her to the criminal underworld, where she would later become known as the Bandit Queen. In 1866, she married Jim Reed, a former Confederate guerrilla. Despite Reed's initial attempts to live a farmer's life, financial struggles pushed him to join forces with the Star family, a Cherokee group involved in horse theft. Together, they and other accomplices, including the James and Younger brothers, carried out a series of daring robberies. Jim Reed, caught up in various illegal activities, ended up getting captured and, during an escape attempt, was killed by a deputy. Widowed Maybelle Shirley, better known as Belle Star, didn't leave the criminal underworld but instead intensified her operations, organizing robberies and dealing in illegal goods. Belle Star was notorious for her ability to manipulate authorities, using both bribes and her personal charm to get what she wanted. In 1880, she married Sam Starr, and 2 years later the couple was convicted of horse theft. After serving a year in prison, they were released and quickly returned to their criminal activities. Belle's life was tragically cut short on February 3, 1889, just 2 days before her 41st birthday, when she was shot dead while riding home from a visit to the general store. The shooter was never identified, leaving her death shrouded in mystery. Number 6. Sundance Kid. His real name was Harry Alonzo Longabaugh, and he became famous under that nickname after a horse theft incident in the town of Sundance, Wyoming, where he was arrested and convicted. Despite his reputation as a gunslinger, there's no solid evidence that he ever actually killed anyone. After getting out of prison in 1896, he teamed up with Butch Cassidy, born Robert Leroy Parker, and together they led the Wild Bunch Gang. This gang made history with its series of successful train and bank robberies, creating one of the longest crime sprees in U.S. history. With increasing pressure from the Pinkerton Detective Agency, Sundance, Butch, and their companion Etta Place decided to flee to Argentina, hoping to escape the relentless pursuit. Although it's widely believed that Sundance died in a shootout in Bolivia, rumors suggest he might have returned to the U.S., living under a new identity in Duchesne, Utah, until 1936. Recently, what is believed to be Longabaugh's body was exhumed, and DNA tests are underway to unravel the mystery of his true fate. These results could shed light on the enigmatic life of one of the most famous outlaws of the Old West. Number 5. Butch Cassidy. His real name was Robert Leroy Parker, and he had a fascinating youth in the late 19th century. Born in 1866, he grew up on Jim Marshall's ranch in Circleville, Utah. At 13 in 1879, Parker got the chance to work on the ranch, where he met Mike Cassidy, a man who would become a major influence in his life. Mike not only became a close friend but also a mentor to Parker, gifting him his first gun and teaching him how to use it skillfully. Out of gratitude and admiration, Parker took on the last name Cassidy in tribute to his friend. Parker's relationship with the law had a curious start that revealed his character. Once, needing new overalls, he went into town to buy them. Finding the store closed, Parker let himself in, picked out a pair that fit just right, and left a note, promising to come back to pay. Even though he showed his honesty, the store owner reported him to the sheriff. Fortunately, Parker's integrity was recognized, and he was cleared of any charges. In 1889, Robert Leroy Parker, better known as Butch Cassidy, and 3 associates pulled off a daring heist at the San Miguel Valley Bank in Telluride, making off with an impressive $21,000. With the money, Cassidy bought a ranch near the infamous outlaw hideout known as Hole in the Wall. However, the farming life wasn't really his thing, and many suspect that he used the ranch more as a front for his criminal operations than as a legitimate farming venture. In 1896, Cassidy rose to greater fame by taking the lead of the Wild Bunch, a gang that included some of the most notorious outlaws of the Old West. Together, they carried out a series of spectacular robberies, permanently etching their names into the criminal history of that era. The final fate of Butch Cassidy is shrouded in mystery. While popular belief holds that he met his end in Bolivia, there are family accounts suggesting that he might have returned to the United States and lived out his later years under a different identity. Number 4. Cole Younger. His life took a drastic turn after the murder of his father by Union Captain Wally, who had been severely beaten by Cole's father for behaving inappropriately with his daughter. Driven by this event, Cole joined the Confederate Army and later turned to a life of crime. The first mention of Cole as an outlaw was linked to the robbery of the Nimrod Longencombe Bank in Russellville, Kentucky, in 1868. Along with his brothers, Cole teamed up with Jesse and Frank James, forming a notorious gang. This group became famous for pulling off numerous stagecoach, train, and bank robberies across states like Missouri, Kentucky, Kansas, and West Virginia. However, the Younger brothers' criminal journey came to an abrupt end on September 7, 1876, when a bank robbery didn't go as planned. To avoid the death penalty, Cole Younger and his brothers Jim and Bob pleaded guilty and were sentenced to life in prison. Surprisingly, they were granted parole in 1901. After getting out of prison, Cole joined Frank James on a tour around the country, where they shared stories of their adventures in the Old West. During this time, Cole converted to Christianity and distanced himself from his criminal past. He passed away peacefully in 1905, still carrying 11 bullets in his body, a lasting reminder of his outlaw days. Cole Younger's story is a reflection on loyalty, family, and the search for redemption, highlighting a life that ended in personal reform, in stark contrast to his rebellious years. Number 3. John Wesley. Named after the founder of Methodism, he had a childhood shaped by the religious influence of his father, a Methodist preacher. At 14, his life took a dark turn when he reacted violently, stabbing a classmate who had provoked him. This incident was just the beginning of a series of turbulent events in his youth. The following year, during a playful scuffle, he accidentally scratched the face of a former slave named Mage. This incident sparked a thirst for revenge in Mage, who ambushed John Wesley the next day. Trying to defend himself, John Wesley fired 3 warning shots that failed to stop Mage. With no other choice, he shot in self-defense, leading to Mage's death. The context of the time made John Wesley's situation even more complicated. In Texas, many lawmen were former slaves, and as a former Confederate soldier, he faced intense prejudice and little chance of a fair trial. So he chose to go into hiding to avoid capture. Even after his brother warned him about the approaching officers, John Wesley decided to face his fate head-on, preparing himself for whatever consequences lay ahead. In a series of events straight out of a Wild West movie, he faced off against and shot 3 officers who were chasing him, managing to escape once again. After a lifetime of arrests and breakouts, he eventually made his way to Abilene, Kansas, where he got the chance to meet Wild Bill Hickok, the iconic lawman. While staying at the American House Hotel, he was deeply annoyed by a loud noise coming from the room next door. Frustrated, he fired 2 shots into the ceiling in protest. The first shot woke up the noisy neighbor, but the second turned out to be fatal. After that accidental shooting, he quickly escaped through the window and headed back to Texas. His life continued to be a constant cycle of running and facing off with the authorities, until he was finally captured and sentenced to 17 years in prison. During his time behind bars, he not only served his sentence but also dedicated himself to his studies and completed a law degree. After his release, he started a new career as a lawyer. However, his past continued to haunt him, and his life ended tragically when he was shot in the back of the head while playing dice. His story paints a vivid picture of the complexities and unforgiving nature of the Old West, culminating in a journey marked by both redemption and tragedy. Number 2. Billy the Kid. He's an iconic figure of the American Old West, often celebrated in countless books, movies, and songs. However, his popular image as a ruthless criminal doesn't always match the reality. In truth, Billy didn't turn to crime because of a natural tendency toward violence, but more due to a series of tough circumstances. Those who knew him well often saw him as brave, clever, and good-natured, with a sharp sense of humor. In a different set of circumstances, Billy the Kid might have led a normal and successful life. The complexity of his character shows that he was more than just an outlaw. He was a product of his time and environment. Billy the Kid is often remembered as a notorious outlaw who supposedly killed 21 people, one for each year of his short life. However, historical evidence shows that he was directly responsible for the deaths of only 4 people. His reputation for violence far exceeds his actual actions. In 1877, Billy started working for John Tunstall, a rancher who was locked in a fierce conflict with merchants Lawrence Murphy and James Dolan. The situation escalated on February 18, 1878, when Tunstall was brutally murdered by men connected to Murphy while he was tending to his cattle. This murder sparked the outbreak of the Lincoln County War, a violent territorial feud. In response, Billy and other ranch hands were deputized as special constables, given legal authority to hunt down and capture the members of the rival group. Billy the Kid and his companions banded together under the name the Regulators, in response to the murder of John Tunstall, diving headfirst into the conflicts of the Old West. However, due to the corruption that plagued the region, the governor ended up backing Murphy's rival group, turning the Regulators into outlaws in the eyes of the authorities. Billy the Kid continued his saga of escapes and dodging the law for several years, until in a dramatic ending, he was killed by Sheriff Pat Garrett while hiding out at a friend's house. Over the years, several people claimed to be Billy the Kid, but those claims have been widely discredited, and the theory that he might have survived or that his body was misidentified is considered unlikely. Billy the Kid's life is a vivid portrayal of the tangled web of revenge, corruption, and survival that defined the Old West era. Number 1. Jesse James. He was from Missouri and fought as a Confederate guerrilla alongside his brother Frank during the American Civil War. After the war ended, the brothers teamed up with the younger brothers to form the infamous James Younger Gang. This group became notorious for a series of spectacular robberies of banks, stagecoaches, and trains. One of these heists took place in 1869 at the Daviess County Savings Association in Gallatin, Missouri, where Jesse, mistakenly identifying a bank employee, ended up committing an unintentional homicide. This incident marked a turning point for Jesse, who sought to clean up his image and find redemption. He found an ally in John Newman Edwards, the editor of the Kansas City Times and a former supporter of the Confederacy. Edwards published numerous articles that cast Jesse and his gang in a positive light, turning Jesse into an almost heroic figure in the public's eyes. Jesse, in turn, used these narratives to build an image of innocence and honor, despite his violent past. Jesse James was already a legendary figure during his lifetime, but his death only boosted his fame. He was betrayed by Robert Ford, a member of his own gang, who shot him in the back of the head in his own home. This moment of betrayal added a dramatic and tragic touch to his already colorful story. His mother, Zerelda James, touched many hearts by choosing a poignant inscription for Jesse's grave, whose hands were not worthy to touch here. As we wrap up our journey through the world of the legendary gunslingers of the Old West, we see how these characters left their mark on history with their remarkable skills and daring adventures. They transport us back to a time when the line between myth and reality often blurred, and the Old West was a stage for the boldest. If you've been captivated by these tales of heroism and infamy, subscribe to our channel. By joining our community, you'll get access to more fascinating stories, engaging documentaries, and in-depth analyses of the iconic figures that defined this era. Click subscribe and come with us to explore the tales of the past.